Good morning. Welcome. I am Cary McCall, your council president for another day. My term ends in a few hours. I know I re-upped again. So I'll be next year as well. This term ends in a few hours. But thank you for coming. I'm here to introduce our senior pastor candidate. Don't forget to come next Sunday and vote after service at 12:30. Anything? And Ryan's here, the chair of the call committee. If you have any questions for him, he's the one who did all this. Anyway, here you go, Pastor Daniel.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I bring my own cheering section with me. Appreciate it. Thanks. Thanks down here. Good morning, church. State of the Communion. There are a lot of exciting things happening in this church, and I know everybody's got pancakes. I think you're fine eating them in here unless you get syrup on the floor. Then you've got to come back tomorrow and help clean. Grateful for all of you on this last day of 2023 to vision with me to what 2024 and beyond look like. You're going to see a couple of proposals in here that are ideas. There are things that we can do. None of this is set in stone. None of this is we're for sure going to do it this way. But I wanted to give some shape to vision. I want to take where we've been and project it on into the future. And I want to talk a little bit about identity of what it means to be Christ the King. So firstly, my clicker's not, there it goes. Let's talk about the secret sauce that is Christ the King, okay? I think there are several identity pieces to who we are that show up in the world. You should know that pretty much everywhere we go around the synod, when we talk to other churches, they say, hey, y'all are that church doing that cool stuff. Y'all are that church that does this or that or the other thing, and then they ask us for access to Mark Hartman, and we say, absolutely not. He is just for us. Here are some things that I think are really cool about this church. One is worship in two spaces where there are no worship wars. And that's a big deal, right? A lot of churches, the contemporary and the traditional folk, fight like Hatfields and McCoys. That's not part of our secret sauce is an equality there, an equality in how we budget, an equality in staff, an equality in vibrancy. It is very rare these days to find traditional service that has children. I don't know if you know this. A traditional service that is vibrant and alive. And it's also rare to find a contemporary service that is progressive. We really are the middle of two Venn diagrams that are pretty beautiful in this particular way that we do worship. The next one is all are welcome, no exceptions. When I was brought to Christ the King, and I met with that call committee, they asked me a lot about the congregation that I helped through the process of becoming open and affirming of the LGBTQIA community, including allowing gay marriages to happen in that congregation. The first one of which I did was Athena and her wife Sam. So it's really cool to have kind of brought that story forward here. They told us that big churches can't be open and affirming. There are very few, particularly in the South. I mean, Minnesota is its own microcosm. Can we agree on that? But the rest of the world, they told us that you can't do that because you'll lose donors. You'll upset somebody. You can't do that. And what we've shown is, yes, we did lose some folk, but we've gained many more. How many of you have joined this church since I've been here? That's a lot. That's a lot. How many of you that have joined in the last 6.5 years have joined partially because we're an open and inclusive church, and that was important to you? Exactly. We broke that mold, honestly. There are other churches that said, I didn't know that you could do that. Justice and advocacy is at the forefront of what we do. I have never met a pastor who knows how to advocate like Pastor Wolfgang. Somebody say amen. I did not know that was a thing you could do. I did not know that pastors sometimes went to town councils with their collars on and demanded money for affordable housing. Do you know pastors who do this? I've never met somebody quite like him, And we've learned a lot about justice and advocacy that will continue as part of his legacy at this place. And also, it's in your all DNA, right? It's in the DNA of this church to do that good work. The next one is our use of technology. Many churches ask us about how we do our live stream. They ask us about how we're continuing to innovate. A couple other churches have taken on doing video announcements, one of which calls it the Big Three. And it's fun to dream about that together. You see the new lighting here in Nagle Hall. This was our $43,000 Christmas present. We've only had them for about 10 days, so we're still getting used to having them. But it improves the quality of the live stream. We have a live stream booth across the hall, so somebody can sit with headset on and listen to the sound because it sounds different in your computer at home or on your TV at home than it does here in the room. And so somebody needs to mix that, turn this up, turn that down, that kind of thing. We are innovating all the time. And we all know that Mark and Sherry have done tremendous work for us. They are gifts that God has sent to us. And a reason why I would never want to leave this church is because of Mark and Sherry. I told them that they have been added to my family prayer list. When I say prayers at night before I go to bed, they're family to me because that's how much I need them. They've done so much for us. And not just that. You know, the video announcements, Church Center, I know that's a little difficult for some of you, but you should know that for the staff on the back end, it is immensely helpful. Folks don't fall through the cracks. When they have prayer requests, there's a ticket for that, right? When your child signs up for the beach retreat, there's a ticket for that. And so all like Haley has to do is print out all the people who've signed up. If we have a bulletin board and we've got another place, it's easier for people to fall through the cracks. And so I appreciate your dedication to that technology. I know it's a change for some of you. And the last one I think that's part of our secret sauce is the way that we develop disciples. We insist that you not leave your brains at home when you come to church. I want you to question. I want you to study. I want you to struggle. I want you to challenge the scriptures. I want you to work through so that your faith is active and alive. And I think that that's a change. I think there are many, many spaces where you just don't question what happens up front, right? I think that that's part of our secret sauce. One of the things that's been really fun to watch grow, and by the way, I'm going to talk about money for a minute, which is a fuel source for us, right? It's not the be-all and end-all. It is, however, a fairly accurate metric for how excited people are because people give to mission and ministry. Over the last 3 years, we've raised our budget 24%, which is a lot. We have raised $134,000 for the Lutheran Services Carolina Be the Light Foundation that helps with foster children and families and helps with adults with traumatic brain injuries. We raised over $100,000 for the solar panels that are above our heads. By the way, as a reminder, you can now go to ctkcary.com/solar and see in real time what our solar panels are doing in the way of energy. We know that we've got money set aside and a plan to put panels on the roof of the sanctuary, which is also a flat roof, in 2024. And we're the largest givers to the North Carolina Synod. We tithe 10% every month. Whatever came in for that month, $110,000, $180,000, 10% of that goes to the Synod. That supports other Lutheran churches. They do other ministry. It goes to our camps, of which we are blessed with 3 camps and 4 sites in North Carolina. There are not many synods that can claim that. We are so blessed to be part of the Synod and to be its largest donor every year. So I think we have so much going for us. I want to talk about where I think we're going. And that starts with naming who we are and where we are. The Alban Institute in the 1990s established 4 different sizes of churches. And the first one is a family size. That's where there's typically one family. And if you really want to get in trouble, you add a second family. And then decide who's council president. The next size up is when you're big enough to finally call and pay for a pastor. And then the next size up is when you add a staff person or two, probably a youth director or a business person, because your pastor swears they know all the business of the church, but it's really better to let a professional handle that. And then you get to what they call corporate size. Some people call it large size, jumbo, whatever you want to call it. That corporate size church is one where there are multiple staff, there are multiple ministries, where the calendar is full. I'm postulating that we are this largest size church, and we operate like a program size church. Our governance, our ministry, our number of committees all suggest that we have lay people running everything, when we actually have very talented staff people, lay staff and clergy, who do great work. And if we shift our governance model, I believe that we've got even more that we can do. We can streamline several processes and do things better. Shout out to my buddy, Bill Albing. Where's Bill? I just saw him a minute ago. Okay, you didn't want me to see him. But you're on my slide deck. You didn't even know. I told Bill that this is the book. It's called Inside the Large Congregation by Susan Beaumont, that I've asked council to read next year. And I told Bill, and he not only did he buy the book, but he posted on social media that he's reading the book, which is where I found it. So gold star to you, Bill, for doing that. What Susan says is that when you accurately name where you are as a congregation, you better support the ministry around it. And I think that we're doing a really good job. I think we can do a great job. And I don't want to get bogged down in this language. There's a real page-turner of a book called Governance and Ministry by Dan Hotchkiss that suggests a new form. So in this form, our structure doesn't have two, you see there's sort of two cones. Our structure has one cone. And both program ministry and governance answer to the council. And you can ask Cameron and the council how overwhelming that feels sometimes. We have committees that make goals. They submit those goals to the council approves them, but at the end of the year, the council does not follow up on whether or not those goals have been met. Moreover, many, if not all, of the goals made in committee are contingent on staff people doing them, okay? So we're going to talk about Haley for a minute. Let's say that Haley is running youth ministry, and she's got a supervisor who's Pastor Athena, but she's also got a committee. The committee wants her to do one thing, and Pastor Athena wants her to do another. What is she supposed to do? And you would think that this doesn't happen, but actually, of course it does, right? We all have different agendas and things. And so our model right now is no longer working for us as well as it did. It's not a bad model. It's simply that if Haley can do her work Monday through Friday, she doesn't have to come to that faith formation meeting that's every month on the calendar. And we can still have a faith formation board that works as a team to support the ministry that Pastor Athena and Haley have laid out for us. The shift here is to let the professionals be professionals. And if you take the burden of managing the staff and the program ministry, youth and children, advocacy, worship, take the management of that off of council's plate. Council can do what it's actually there to do, which is write policy, protect the governance and the bylaws. They elect leaders. They work closely with the personnel to make sure that we're adequately staffed. And you let the professionals, we have almost 20 people on staff that are just kind of smushed into our governance model. Let's let them do their work. And let's support them. So when we show up to Worship and Music Ministry Board, or we show up to Faith Formation Ministry Board, we don't come necessarily with all of our agenda that we want to make the staff do. We show up and say, how can we help? You're the professional, and I want to support you. What Hotchkiss says in this gem of a book that I won't make you read is that volunteers actually prefer this. It takes the mental load of having to be a professional youth director off of their plate and enables volunteers to do the thing that they are there to do, which is volunteer, to help out, to lend a hand. It makes happier workers. Habitat for Humanity works in this model. When you show up, there are blue hats, like Bob. Where'd Bob go? When he's not wearing pajamas, he wears a blue hat at Habitat. And when you go, you do what the blue hat tells you to do, okay? You don't show up to Habitat and say, you know, better than this deck, I think we should make this a screened-in porch. Do you do that at Habitat? Please say no. No? You show up and say, how can I help? That's part of the joy of it. So this shift in governance would take a while. It's not something that would happen overnight. We'd have to work through it. We'd have to sort of align. But I believe we are that larger size church. All of our metrics suggest that we are. We go to the large church conference every year. We're the second largest church in our state. We need to start naming and claiming who we are. And that brings me to Anchor Church. A lot of you have been asking what Anchor Church is. This came up in our meeting at the beginning of December, and I said, I can't tell you yet. Well, guess what? I can. I can tell you now. This picture of me and Pastor Wolfgang isn't just a gorgeous picture of the two of us. This picture was in your stewardship brochure. It was an Easter egg in our stewardship brochure, because this picture was taken in front of Lord of Life Lutheran Church in Garner, North Carolina, about 15 miles away from where we are. We identified, Pastor Wolfgang and I have been in a cohort called Anchor Church that meets with churches all over the country. And it's about larger churches coming alongside smaller churches and helping in some way, becoming yoked in some way. And there's a huge spectrum there, all the way from cousins, which is what I'm calling us now, where we just kind of know each other and we're in each other's lives, all the way to maybe the far end of the spectrum is a merge of some kind, where we become one congregation with two sites. Pastor Wolfgang and I have been dreaming about this for some time. I went to a funeral there in 2020 and thought, man, what I'd do if I got my hands on this place. We started talking about it. We went to the Anchor Church conferences in Denver and in Ohio. We've been doing that for a couple of years. Then their pastor came to retire, and we said, I wonder if we could talk to the bishop in getting an interim there. And we did. We talked to the bishop in the men's room at Convocation at Luther Ridge and said, hey, John Petrie, who's a member of Christ the King, is available for call. John Petrie's been their interim for the last year. Then we reached out to their council after John Petrie sort of sprinkled some CTK dust around the place. We went to their council president and said, we'd like to become partners with you all. He came here. He had lunch with us. He was here on Christmas Eve, by the way. Just saw him a couple days ago. And we pitched a crazy idea. You see, the thing that most Anchor churches do is they raise up somebody like Rachel or like Nathan. They have an intern or a vicar, and then they send them to the satellite, right? They send them to the other church. We thought of an even crazier idea. What if we gave Lord of Life and Garner our senior pastor? What if we sent to them the best mission developer in the United States of America? Somebody say amen. What if we sent them a former bishop, former DEM, former mission developer, former pastor who started his own church in New Jersey? And what if we began a partnership with them? Now, we held our horses for a little bit, right? We sometimes say we don't want God to just bless all of our good ideas. We want to listen to God and to the Spirit. We pitched this picture was a Saturday in July where they agreed to let us come meet with their council. They moved their council meeting from Sunday to Saturday so that we could be there, and we pitched this idea to them. And they said yes. And about a month ago, Pastor Wolfgang's been over there. He's been named primary candidate at Lord of Life in Garner, and he has a call vote on January 21st over there. So we're really excited about this. We're cousins. The whole spectrum of relationship is open to us. All of us could see a way in which Pastor Wolfgang goes to be their half-time pastor. And after 3 years of being there, his call is projected to be a 3-year term call. At the end of 3 years, he might have grown that place so much that they're ready to call their own full-time pastor, and they don't need to be yoked with us in any big way. And that would be wonderful and great. We would be proud to have had that happen, right? But also on the other end of the spectrum, after 3 years with Pastor Wolfgang, we might feel a lot closer than cousins, don't you think? And there could be some sort of working together merge situation. So we're going to be open to the Spirit on how that is happening. But we do believe that as a larger church, we are called to help in any way that we can. And help me with language really matters. And help us shift language to say the church is dying or the church is declining. And let's say that the church is consolidating. Because that's really what happens. And churches like us are in a position where we can help. One of the things that they warn in the Anchor Church process is that you think you're coming alongside as a rescue boat, and sometimes the other congregation feels like you are a battleship. So we know we're going to have to, have relationship together. We've put $10,000 in our budget to send there, pending a couple of votes here in January, and we'd like to support them in mission. They really can't afford a half-time pastor, and so since we wanted to be part of that solution in some way, we decided to be part of that solution in the whole way. There's another $1,000 in our budget to do something together. We don't know what that is, a picnic, a barbecue, a get-together of some kind. We suspect that some of you are going to want to go over there and hear Wolfgang preach from time to time. Please be on your best behavior when you do that. We'd appreciate that. And also, we're just really excited. We're excited to do this together. They are close to us and far at the same time. Some of you live in Garner, and this is going to be closer to you, and you're going to want to go over there sometimes. We have agreed we're going to write a covenant together, and Pastor Wolfgang is going to insist that if you want to give money over there, it's in addition to your pledge at Christ the King, right? We're not siphoning off at this point. But as the two congregations get to know each other, there's a lot to be excited here. Did you know that this church happens to have an all-day daycare for folks in wheelchairs? Did you know that the similarities between us just kind of keep going? Do you know that they are still very upset that their pastor, Dave Brooks, left them for us? People don't forget, all right? So our way is saying, we're mending that fence. We're giving you our pastor now. Our church was started by Holy Trinity in Raleigh, right? So we're all part of the same cycle. This is what happens. This is how. So anyway, that's enough about that. Really exciting. I don't know if you know this about me, but I've been in large church parish ministry for the last 20 years. I started out as a youth director in 2003 at a church called Desert Cross in Tempe. I served there for 5 years. I preached on occasion, and during my time there, we started a second campus in another suburb called Gilbert, Arizona. Then when I went on internship, when I was a vicar, I served at Our Savior's Mesa in the east part of Phoenix, Arizona. It was the 7th largest church in the ELCA. It had 3 campuses and worshipped somewhere around 3,000 people in the winter, and about 500 in the summer. A very big church, and in it, they had 2 sites. One was this kind of thing, merging with another congregation, and then they built another one in the suburb of the suburb of the suburb where the nature starts, called Gold Canyon, Arizona. And I got to see them go from worshiping in a storefront to building their building and being part of that. Our son Thomas was the first person baptized at the Gold Canyon site. So I got to pick the words. There's not a lot of water in Arizona. Whenever they put in a water feature, they really make a big deal of it. So we put some verbiage there. And then in Winston-Salem, where I first served as an associate pastor, we partnered with a small historic church called Shiloh Lutheran. Shiloh is older than the United States of America. It's in Louisville, and they couldn't afford much of anything, but they were still vibrant. After I had been a vicar and done this kind of thing, I proposed to them, what if we, Augsburg, called a vicar, and we sent the vicar to them, and that 4 times a year the vicar would come to Augsburg and preach, and I would go out to Louisville and preach. And we did that successfully with 3 different vicars for 3 years. We sort of became cousins, or we became yoked in this way. So this isn't something that I thought I knew a lot about until we started doing it and realized that, life happens in a funny way, and it just so happens I've had a good amount of exposure to this, and I know a little bit about the pitfalls and some of the... So anyways, just another thing I think is really exciting here. I want to shift gears and talk about confronting racism in church and society. This is one of the things that we've promised to do. And one of the bigger issues that's facing us is that the same 30 people show up every time we do these things. Every time we do a workshop, the same 30 people are getting trained. I don't think that's going to change unless we all commit to doing it on the same day. And I'm suggesting that January 20th of 2025, which is Martin Luther King Day, it's the Monday, that we all do a training together. That we get childcare, we get Chris to make some food, we just do it. We all do it. And until we get a big mass of us doing it, it's still going to be a marginal ministry to what we do. This is a day that's a federal holiday. Most of you have it off. If you don't have it off, I'd be happy to write a letter to your employer, and I dare them to say that you can't take that day off and do this. I think, not that it's about making the news, I think this would make the news. I think we could establish a model for other churches to follow that want to confront racism in church and society. I think we could develop a curriculum. I think we could come up with something. Our racial solidarity team has been doing a great job of doing this with smaller cohorts. I talked to Andre Anthony, the CEO of Dorcas, about this idea. He's excited. He knows people on the national level that we could bring in to do some really deep work about confronting racism in church and society. And I think if we all put it on our calendars a year from now, a lot of us could show up that day and do it together. What do you think? I think that'd be pretty cool. I like to talk about racism using the game Monopoly. This isn't my invention, but I heard somebody say this once. He said, racism is a lot like playing the game of Monopoly, where one person wasn't allowed to play the game until all the property had been bought. And after all that property's been bought, that one person now playing the game has some choices. They can pay rent, or they can go to jail. And I think that's a really easy way to understand that racism isn't just how you're playing the game, it's that the game is rigged. The game is in favor of the people who've had property since the beginning of the game, and the people who came in later have no choice. There's not enough upward mobility. And I think when we de-emphasize the personal efforts of I'm not a racist, whatever that means, and we emphasize that the game is rigged. It's not just how you're playing the game, although that certainly matters. The game is rigged. So when you say, hey, all I'm doing is playing the game, yeah, the system is wrong. I think one of the best ways that we can do that is confront the racism in churches. This has long been a harbor of racism. Google churches involved in the slave trade and see what you find, or maybe don't. I think if we commit to doing this together, we can really gain momentum. I think it's the next step for us. So I'm proposing this date, and should I become your senior pastor, we'll continue to offer this as something on the horizon that we can do together. I'm going to shift gears again to our digital ministry and metrics. I believe we have the best data in the ELCA. We ran an online survey back in March asking people a bunch of questions, one of which was, how many people are worshiping with you online? So we could get a better sense of that. The ELCA is no help. They say you should take every single possible number you can find on YouTube metrics and multiply it by 2. We think that's a pretty inflated number. Our number is 1.89 for people watching on Sunday. We don't believe that a family of 5 is gathering around a smartphone on a Wednesday night at 9:30 p.m. But the ELCA would say, count that as 2. Every time I go in and watch a service, or Mark, or Derek, or Chris, or Pastor Wolfgang, or Pastor Athena, or Pastor Pam, they multiply that number by 2. And that's probably 30 a week, or just me, or just us, rewatching, right? So I don't want to get into all the, I know you don't, I would love to get into all the nitty-gritty details, but let me just tell you this. The YouTube gives you metrics called unique viewers. That means they know who you are. You're signed in to Google, right, with your Gmail or something like that, and they call that a unique viewer. Then there are unique devices, which is the sort of the IP address approach. Then there are concurrent users. That's the number of people watching at the same time. Then there are views, which is anything under 10 seconds. And then there's something called impressions, which is only 3 seconds. Okay? The ELCA tells you to take every single number you can find and inflate it. And we didn't want to do that. So we drilled down to the metrics, Mark and I, mostly Mark. We drilled down into the metrics and determined that concurrent live streamed view number, the number of people the maximum number of people watching, worshiping a service at the same time, we're going to use that number because here's what happens. I sit on here and I sign in to YouTube, and then I sign up so that I can do the prayers later, and then I come up here and my phone goes to sleep and I get kicked off, and then I join again, right? That would count me about 5 times, times 2. But peak concurrent users, we multiply that number by 1.87. That's based on our metric. And then the rest of the week, we take every number and multiply it by 1. 1, not 2 or something. We ran this survey. We ran the same survey at Christ Lutheran Church in Charlotte, the other big church in North Carolina. Their number was 1.9. We ran it at several other the anchor church churches, and all of our numbers were between 1.85 and 1.92. So we believe we have the best data set in the ELCA. And so I'm giving you some reason to trust this data because the data is really interesting. We have really good reason to invest in both of our traditional and our contemporary services. We have more people in the room in contemporary every week, minus the cantata. We have more people online in traditional every week. We can extract a lot of data out of this, okay? That tells me we should be investing in both. I talked to a young woman who lives in Charlotte 2 weeks ago, who I kind of knew but didn't know well, but she asked to talk to me, so we got on Zoom, and she goes, the whole time that I've been gone from Cary, I miss my church. I love this church. I think this church is great. I didn't even know who she was. She's not a member, but this was her church. So these kinds of things are going to continue to shift what it means to belong here. That's why we use the word disciple and not the word member. The word member is important. You can only vote next week if you're a member. That's in the Constitution. But to call this your church, to be a disciple of this place, is getting bigger and harder to define. And that means we need to continue to invest in digital ministry. There's a bunch more I could tell you here. I'm going to move on because this tells us that what gets measured gets managed. I love that quote from Peter Drucker. I think we have a realistic number of on-site 350 folks every week and online 450. I don't believe that number is inflated 450. I think that number is probably conservative. Okay? Somewhere between 800 and 1,000 people are worshiping with us every single week. That not only puts us in the large category, it also makes us rethink how we do everything. Once I had this data, I rewrote all the welcomes at the beginning of worship that start by saying, whether you're on site or online. We don't say in person and online because that sort of makes a bifurcation. On site and online suggest equal footing. We're finding more and more ways to engage that. But the truth is, there's so much more we could do in the digital space. We cleaned 231 people off of our rolls this year, which really hurts the growth numbers. But these are people we haven't seen or heard from since the pandemic began. And other churches might keep them on their rolls, but that doesn't have integrity, right? We send them letters. We do a lot of things. We send letters. We call them. Sometimes they've changed their number or they've moved, quite frankly, and we don't have a way of getting to that. But here's the thing that I think is really sad. We didn't offer people who've moved a way to be part of us somewhere else. We don't have a digital campus. Wouldn't you have rathered that letter that says, we're going to move you to the inactive list, also had another option of you can be part of CTK as a digital campus? Wouldn't you rather? Yeah. Wouldn't you rather that that your grown children all over the world could feel connected to this place if they so chose? 2.5 thousand views every month of our YouTube channel in various capacities. Live stream worship, sermons, Bible studies, etc. That's a lot of traffic that we're not giving enough attention yet. And what this tells me is that we need to make more asynchronous content. I know everybody in school just cringed as soon as I said that word, and probably your parents did too. There's some trauma associated with that. But the idea is that we're making content that you can participate with on your time, on your schedule. I had coffee with a guy last week who wants to join the church, but he works for the weather service, and his schedule switches every week. And he said, part of the reason I liked your church is that I could worship in person, I could worship at work, don't tell his boss, or I could worship after I woke up because I was up all night, right? We need to be more invested in this. I believe we need to take our communications position, make it full-time again, and make it centered around podcasts, about reels. Don't lie to me and tell me you don't spend hours a day watching reels and TikToks. Okay, Joseph is not lying. He is not going to lie. Why are we in this digital space? We have all the technology. We have a recording studio downstairs. I have a podcast that gets ill-attended to because right now I have to schedule it, do the interview, do the editing, and post it, right, all myself. And you can imagine how often I get around to doing that. If we had a full-time communication person, we could put more of this content out there. And you know what we're finding is that the reason that people find us is because you sent them a link. How many times have you posted a sermon or told somebody about a Bible study and you're like, you think church is like this, but listen to this. How many of you have done that before? You think church is this way, but let me show you what my church does, right? And I would insist that this isn't just a sales funnel to bring people back into the building. I think churches that are doing that in 2024 are doing it wrong. We make content because our mission is to share the good news that Jesus Christ is Lord. It's not to fund dollars and buildings, right? That's the thing that Martin Luther was most against, right? Is that all the money was going to build St. Peter's Basilica. What we're trying to do is spread the gospel, and I believe there are millions of people in this country dying for some quality, progressive, Bible-based discipleship. Somebody say amen. I believe there are millions of people looking for this. I'm not saying that we're going to satisfy everyone's dreams, but the number one thing that we hear in new members classes is, I didn't know a church like this existed. A lot of folk who have religious trauma, particularly those in an LGBTQIA community or those who are part of a minority that didn't know that there were churches, mainline churches that could sort of be more welcoming. I like to say we're not always a safe space. I can't promise that, but we are a brave space. If you're willing to show up and be brave, we're willing to show up and be brave alongside you. I think there's a lot we could do in this digital space, and I don't even think we've opened this door yet. I don't even think we've opened this door, but that's something that I'd like to do in 2024. Shifting gears yet again, I believe that churches should be places of learning. The Missouri Synod Church does a way better job than us at establishing schools everywhere. I'm not suggesting we start more private schools. I think the way to do this is actually to fund public schools and fund them better so that everyone has the same access. Anybody who tells you that private school is cheaper and better hasn't accounted for food or transportation in their numbers, right? But I do believe that there are lots of adults who want to learn, who want to grow. Our confirmation program here is called Discipleship Academy. I'd like to make something for adults called the Leadership Academy, the CTK Leadership Academy. And in it, we reclaim that churches are places where you can grow and learn. It wouldn't just be open to us, it'd be open to others. And I just, off the top of my head, came up with some classes based on, this is called the Wholeness Wheel. If you go on any Lutheran retreat, they're going to show you the Wholeness Wheel with Jesus in the center and spiritual well-being on the outside. But there is a lot of merit to it. Off the top of my head, I believe that the world needs more Bible. That's why I spend half of a year planning a lecture and the other half a year giving a lecture. It takes a lot of time, and it is well worth it. There are people, every now and then I get emails from somebody all over who's learning something that they didn't know, right? And one of the things that upset me in seminary was I learned things and went back to my home pastor and said, "Did you know this?" He goes, "Yeah, I knew that." I'm like, "Well, why didn't you ever teach me?" And he said, "Well, I didn't know that people were ready." I think we're well past that, don't you think? Ready or not, here we come. I think we have something to teach. We have several excellent professors in this congregation, several excellent medical professionals. We have several excellent marriage therapists, counselors, PhDs, yoga instructors, anti-racism coaches. We have so many things we can offer. What if we put together a curriculum and offered it to ourselves and to the community so that adults could continue being lifelong learners for free? I think that would be really beautiful, don't you? We're nearing the end. Thanks for hanging with me. These are some of the ideas. You can ask the call committee. My rostered minister profile was 24 pages, which they thought was too long. And then I brought in a supplemental 16-page proposal packet to things I think we can do. We have a space on the other end of the building that we call Luther Cafe. When I first got here, they were still selling Coca-Cola for 50 cents. We've moved the coffee bar here. It's clear that having coffee in between the worship spaces works for us. It helps us become one congregation. I think that makes a lot of sense. We have a space that's a mixed-use space, and I would like to see it turned back into a chapel. I think it could still be mixed use. I think we could use chairs instead of pews. But I'd like this to be, this spot started the traditional space, which is now in the sanctuary, and the contemporary service, which now meets in here. If we were going to reinvent, or if we were going to launch a new service, it would be in that space. I'd like to have a chapel for smaller weddings and funerals and memorial services. The sanctuary feels awfully big when there's 10. I'd like to see that the preschool has a place to do chapel that's not the sanctuary. On the 23rd of December every year, I host something called the Blue Christmas Service. There are many, many people who find this to be a very difficult time. And there are many of us that find this to be a difficult time that want to have a good time on the 24th if we can process our emotions on the 23rd. 4 years ago, that Blue Christmas service had 15 people, then 20, then 35. And I don't know, a week ago, we had 47. Everyone came in for this solemn service and started to sit down, and more people came up, got in. I made everyone get up, push their chairs closer to me so that we could add another row. It would be great to have a 60-person chapel. I'd like to see us kind of put some white walls around and kind of just make this a nice chapel space where folks could come in. The prayer service happens here on Fridays. I just don't think a cafe is the thing that we want it to be in 2024. Also, 2024 is the 60th anniversary of this congregation, and I think that it's a great year to reestablish this as the Christ the King Chapel. I'm near the end, and I just wanted to say, next week we have a vote. You know who I am. I'm amazed that anyone came to meet and greets, but many of you did, and you heard some of this. I acknowledge that, not everybody likes everybody, and I might not be your cup of tea. If this vote does go in a positive direction, and I end up being your pastor, and that isn't your druthers, I'd love to be able to meet with you. If you have an objection to me being your senior pastor, I will make time for you, even in this next week between now and the vote. I'd love to hear from you, non-defensively hear what you have to say. If you can say it in love, I can receive it in love. We don't always have to get along. The ministry of the church did not always have people get along. Jesus only had 12 people in his church, and they never got along. So, yes, this is from Shrek, in case you're wondering. If you have an objection, I'd love to hear it. And in closing, I want to share with you a little bit of that 24-page roster minister profile. They ask you to write some things that you believe that you are above and beyond what you've already written. So everything I'd written prior to that was theology. This is sort of who I am. And so I wanted to share that with you. It's three slides here. And I'm going to read it to you so you hear my voice. I much prefer to be a leader from within. I strive to make sure all voices get heard, and that process and conversations follow the highest of ethical standards. I'm easygoing and usually willing to work together toward a win-win result, or at best, or at worst, a compromise that everyone can live with. I choose my words carefully, most of the time, and my battles even more carefully. I deal with conflict quickly, choosing to solve problems while they're still small and before they can fester. I encourage feedback, even negative feedback, so long as it's constructive. I've learned not to read or respond to anonymous letters, and I won't be doing that. The same can be said of folks triangulating. That means you come to me and say, so-and-so's mad at you. I'm going to say, go get so-and-so. My door is always open for direct communication. If I am the leader, the buck stops with me. I take blame for my decisions, and I refuse to throw my team under the bus. I will make decisions quickly if that's what is called for, but I prefer to consult with others when time allows. If I don't know something, I'll ask for help. If it's a difficult situation, I'll often consult several people who think very differently from me. I believe in emotional intelligence, the Enneagram, spiral dynamics, and Myers-Briggs typology, and I use them every day. I believe in trusting experts in their fields. I believe in spiritual directors, therapists, mentors, and coaches. I believe in apologizing when I make a mistake. I believe that people quit bosses more than they quit their jobs, and I strive to be a good boss every day. I believe that I am never the smartest person in the room. I use humor to diffuse when needed, but mostly to remind us to not take ourselves too seriously. I see the gospel as a calling toward racial, gender, and overall equality of all people before God. I have high standards for people and organizations, and I'm aware that as a pastor, I'm a role model, and I hold myself to very high standards as well. I'm saying this to you as a covenant. I'd like you to call me on this when I'm hypocritical of these things, but also show you that there's a wave happening of millennial bosses. And millennials, we've all been to therapy. Like, we just all decided to go to therapy as millennials, and we've learned a lot about ourselves. I tell my kids all the time, one of my goals as your dad is to let you know what your blind spots are. You're never going to be good. You're never going to rid yourself of weaknesses. Can we stop calling them growing edges and just start saying, we know we're going to have weaknesses, and we're going to work to mitigate those by leaning on other people who don't have weaknesses in our areas, and also by naming and claiming who we are. In conclusion, I think the state of the communion is very strong. I'm very excited about what this church can be. I am passionate about this. And if you call me to be your 5th ever senior pastor, I promise to be a servant leader for all that God is calling us to in 2024 and beyond. Thoughts, questions? Any questions? Yeah, Steve.
Do you envision a time when you have communion at all services every Sunday?
The question is, do I envision a time when we have communion at all services every Sunday? I envision a time when we will have communion every hour of every Sunday that we have worship, which is what we have now. There's communion always in the building at 8:30. There's communion always in the building at 11. There's not communion in every worship service, but you're welcome to leave one and go have communion in the other. There are many people who do that. The reason that we protect that is we've had more baptisms than funerals for 7 years running. We have more things going on than a lot of places do. We promise to honor your time. Every service, it was between 60 and 65 minutes. And if we add communion to every service, we will limit the number of other ministries that we can do. We need to protect that time because we're one of the few churches that's still protecting the Sunday school hour. And as soon as those services get too long, we can no longer do that. So I acknowledge that that's a point of frustration for a lot of folk. Again, it is in the building, and I think that's a worthy question and something that we talk about a lot. When we plan worship to the minute, we consider how long communion takes. It takes about 8 minutes on average, and that's why we do it that way. Hope that helps. Mark, can we be done? Is that what you're going to say? Uh-huh. How do I propose to get input from the congregation is a question that came in from the chat. As you can see from this presentation, I think data points are really important, right? What gets measured gets managed. So we're always looking at how to run surveys that are effective. We just ran one, by the way, for the Wednesday night dinners to see what people like and what they don't like so that we can do better. We'll always be soliciting feedback in a larger group. I mean, the truth is we're a very large group, and we don't want to create a situation of winners and losers, but we're always going to be welcoming feedback, and we'll run surveys periodically throughout the year so that we know where people stand on things and what they want. Good question. Anybody else? Yeah, Randy.
Can you maybe say a little bit more about what the potential downsides are of changing the governance model?
He's asking, what are the potential downsides of changing the governance model? I think one of the risks, I don't know if it's really more risk reward than definite downside. One of the risks is folks that have had positions of leadership, say in faith formation or worship and music or resource, would find themselves now at volunteers and less at a leader level. Now, what we would do is fold them into the staff rather than folding the staff into them, right, which is a smaller church model. But I do think that there's some risk that some folk who've had some power, if you will, might have a more of a struggle getting access to running it the way that we've always done. One of the quotes that I absolutely love, and you'll hear me say a lot, is, the past gets a vote, not a veto. And I think that that's probably one of the things that shifts there. Yeah. Anyone else?
Pastor Daniel, in your leadership academy, is there room or possibly a way that we might think about
Music?
yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a great question. And the Leadership Academy, her question was, is there a way that we could add music into the Leadership Academy? I think that's a great, right? This was off the top of my head, the things that we can offer. But music is definitely one of those sacred things that churches have been doing for a very long time and something that we could teach. Absolutely. We've got lots of folk like yourself who could lead in those ways. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Pam. Yeah, that's on this slide here. Her question was, are we interested in calling a pastor from the BIPOC community? Calling a pastor from the BIPOC community is certainly a goal of mine. The only thing I need you to know is that working in a large church is a specialized ministry, like a campus ministry or a chaplaincy. Not everybody who's a pastor can do this. This is a fast-moving train, right? And I think one of our learnings from the last couple of years is that you can't just plug and play people into what we do. All things being equal, would love to call a third and a half pastor who's from the BIPOC community. I think that that's clearly a next step for us to live into our strategic directions. And to have that leadership from the front, makes everything better. Yeah. All right, I'm going to close this in prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Good and gracious God, you are faithful to us even when we err. We ask that you bless this community, this church, that you be with this great communion, this great cloud of witnesses. Enable us, Lord, to move forward. Be with us as we vote next week on the new senior pastor. Bless this community as it heads forward. Bless the Lord of Life and Garner. Bless all those who are looking for a church and haven't found one yet. And bless us, Lord, as we continue to grow in your ways to learn, live, and tell the story of your grace. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, if you're staying for worship, you got to go to the other room, and you've got 6 minutes. See you there.